Good morning. So we're going to do a couple of things this morning as a part of this session, and as the topic said, we're going to talk about e-recording, or about recording fees specifically. But I want to give you a little background on a couple of things that's going on from a national perspective, and then tell you a little bit about PREA, the organization that was mentioned, which I have to do, but I would like to do a plug for while I'm here. And then also the second part of the session is going to be more talking about what's going on here in the state. And we have a couple of people from our local county here that are going to be maybe answering some questions at the end. But Chris Rich is still in the back of the room, the clerk of the 4th District Clerk here in Ada County, and Jim Morton is here on the front, who is the recording manager for Ada County. So we want to get some local input too, because a lot of my comments in the beginning are going to be more from a national basis. So that's our plan for this session. So number one, there was a mention of PRIA. We call that PREA. Anybody heard of that before? All right, one or two maybe. Okay, PREA is the Property Records Industry Association, and it was created over 15 years ago as an opportunity for county recorders and other stakeholders in the land records process to come together and try to figure out some kind of standards that could be used for this new technology called e-recording. So obviously e-recording is not new now, it's been around for a number of years. But PREA is the organization that created those initial XML standards that all of the vendors use to move data back and forth between the various systems that you may have in your office, as well as the systems that the recorders have in their office. So that was kind of the original function of PREA. Since then, we've moved into a number of different things. One of those has become TRID education. About a year ago, we realized that some of us who have been on the conference circuit, and we go to land title conferences, and we go to mortgage banker conferences, and we go to county recorder conferences, we realized that nobody was making an outreach to let the recorders know what was going on within this big real estate industry that we have out there. And so PREA took on the role, or assumed a role, of providing some education to the recorders. I want to tell you a little bit about what we've done there as a backdrop for where that gets us to talk specifically about recording fees. Now, also there is a second part of PREA called PREP, P-R-E-P. And that is the Property Records Education Partners. And that is a local arm, if you will, of PREA. And what we have seen in a number of the states around the country is that a state or a geographic region will choose to create a PREP chapter, which consists of people from the recorder's office and typically people from the industry side of the business. And they'll have a meeting once or twice a year and talk about issues common to document recording and things that happen in the process during recording. One of the things that came out of a PREP chapter in Texas was e-recording was becoming mainstream from a technology standpoint, but was not getting much acceptance in Texas. And so at one of the PREP meetings, they were talking about why there wasn't more people from the title side wanting to submit electronically. And they said, well, one of the issues that we have is we can't pass on the submission fee that the e-recording vendors charge to deliver the document. We can't pass that on to the consumer, and we're having to eat that cost. And so there was some discussion, and they wound up putting together a group that went back to the state insurance commissioner and got that person to change their mind as to whether or not that was an allowable expense to show at that time on the HUD settlement. And there was a dramatic increase in e-recording within the state of Texas. So it also can be an arm not only for discussion, but also could help be a conduit for conversation that could potentially lead to changes on the legislative side. So I would just offer that to you, and if that's something that you see an interest for, I actually had a conversation the other day with Jim, and he said he would be willing to maybe help try to put something like that together here in Idaho if there's an interest from this side of the house. So I just wanted to make that plug also. All right, so I talked about PREA taking on this TRID role, or TRID education role, and we did actually create a document, which I had the opportunity to be a part of putting this together. And we made 2 or 3 pretty significant statements, and I wanted to just read you a couple of lines out of here to let you know kind of the tone and what we were trying to communicate to the recorders. We made the statement that in early October, this was last summer, in October 2015, the world of your mortgage lenders and settlement agents is going to change, and recorders will be affected. Now, we also go on to say that the recorder is not involved in the transaction from the standpoint of being at the closing table, but the way the recorder's office runs and makes decisions and implements their policies has a dramatic impact on you who are sitting across from the consumer. So, we made that statement up front. So then we gave them a little background on who CFPB was and how they're this big new enforcement arm, talked about some of the penalties that they could impose, and the recorders are going, wow, that's pretty serious stuff. So we thought, okay, we're getting the message across, and they're hearing that. But then we also tried to communicate to them that the people buying homes in their county or parish or jurisdiction are voting citizens, and that if there are issues that come out over time that relate to delays or issues around why they get more documents, that the recorder, it would be in the recorder's best benefit to be proactive in trying to help address some of those issues and not wind up being on the end of getting blamed for something that they really were just doing their job on, but they could get painted in a bad light. So we tried to communicate that. Then we made the statement that the recording industry is facing the greatest catalyst for change that the recording industry has ever experienced. Now, that's a pretty strong statement. Why would we say that? I believe, and we as a PREA organization believe, that the increased scrutiny that we are seeing now and that we're going to be seeing on recording fees is disproportionate to the amount of the fee itself. I mean, there is so much liability and so much rework that can be associated with a $3 change in fee, as we were just talking about in the panel previously. It's disproportionate. It doesn't make sense. And I don't believe that the industry can continue to operate in that environment. And so we want the recorders to understand the amount of pressure that potentially could be applied from some of the very large lenders and from some of the very large underwriters around a $3 fee difference. You can't perform a business and have millions of dollars at stake based on a $3 item. I mean, that's counterintuitive to the way we do business. And I don't believe that will exist over the long haul. So we want the recorders to know, hey, something needs to change here. There also have been some discussions on the national level about the New York Federal Reserve Bank looking into the process of recording fees and why there is so much variation across the country. There was a task force spun up by the Uniform Law Commission to look at standardized data systems at a state level. Now, you can infer what you want from a standardized system, whether that's actually everybody has the same system or whether that is, in fact, a state system for the distribution of information. But when you start talking about those kind of state centralization or potentially federal issues, the local recorders tend to pay a little more attention now because they feel threatened. So how do you help control that? You try to be proactive and play a part in this bigger real estate environment. So I'm giving you a lot of background, and I apologize for doing that, but I want to make sure I paint the picture appropriately. So then we continue with this paper and say, you know, what are some things that the recorder's office could do to be a good partner in this bigger real estate industry? And so we listed several things, and I'm just going to read you 2 or 3 of them, and then we're going to specifically talk about one of them. Number one, recognize that recording is an integral part of the broader real estate industry. Work to avoid potential delays in the recording process through greater collaboration within your county. In some states, in order to record deeds, the document may have to go to multiple departments within the county before it can actually be accepted by the recorder's office. I.e., might need to go to the audit office or the GIS department. Now, I don't think that's as big an issue here as it is in some states, but that can be a hindrance. Communicate what your pricing methodology is. And then the thing that we're going to talk about the most and spend the rest of the time on is providing a predictable pricing model for recording fees. And when we start talking about that, we tend to hear 2 or 3 things. The folks on the lending and the title side say, you know, it's impossible for me to know what the fees are going to be in advance. And the recorder says, well, you know, I've got these fees displayed on my website. It says it's so much for this page and so much for the next page. Well, what's the problem? Well, the problem is you don't always know how many pages it's going to be. I mean, true, that is a formula, but if the basis of the formula is page count and you don't know the number of pages, then the formula doesn't work real well. Now, you know, we also have the issue of add-on fees or those kind of things that can mess up the process too. But I was thinking about this the other day, and I just went through the process of selling a home, and I was on the part of the CFB side that's ignored, in my opinion, the seller side, because in their world the seller doesn't exist. And so I felt that, and there were some issues that I had to deal with, and I was doing this in Texas, and the simultaneous issue of policies caused for some significant differences on the title policy fees, and we went through some of that, and it was painful for the title company that I was working with. But the point that came to me is you list all of these fees on the closing disclosure, or in your case, if you're using a settlement statement. One of the smallest items on there in volume and quantity is the recording fee. But they get a disproportionate amount of energy put into working with them. The other thing that I realized, and I don't know why it just hit me one day, but of all the fees that are disclosed and a part of the transaction, there is only one fee where the service has not been completed prior to closing. And that's the recording fee, because the recording fee doesn't happen until after closing. Everything else is historical in terms of the service was requested, the service was performed, and here's the cost. In the current world where we're dealing with recording fees, we are making a projection as to what the recording fees are going to be. And as we all know, sometimes those projections are not correct for a variety of reasons. So we made a proposal from PRIA that said, we think the industry should start looking for predictable fees for recording. Now, what does predictable mean? We intentionally did not use the term flat fee because some people infer that as every document has to be the same price. There are some states where that's the case. There are other states where certain document types have a certain fee attached to them, but different document types have different fees. So we felt like predictable was the key term. And what we really are trying to stress is that it is not page count based and it is not subject to add-ons, which are sometimes hard to be aware of. Now, again, from a recorder standpoint, they can take the position of saying, well, but our fees are published. You know what our fees are. Well, in some states, even though the fees are published, whether or not a county charges a fee is a local county option. So you could have a state regulation that says these fees are potential fees that could be charged, but unless you are intimately familiar with a particular county's operation, you would not know whether they have chosen to implement that fee or not. And we, since we're out in the western part of the United States, we see that a lot in California. That they have a myriad of fees that are local option at the county level. And it's very difficult for someone outside of that county to keep up with who's doing what. So the point is, when the recorder says, well, we've got the fees there, it's not always that easy. And when the title or settlement agent says, it's hard for me to calculate the fees using that model because I don't know the number of pages. I may not know if the legal description is a paragraph or 2 pages. Or I may not know if an additional document is going to be needed or if a cover page is going to be needed at the time that these estimates are put in place. So there are some valid concerns on both sides, and we would advocate that a, quote, predictable fee is a solution whose time has come. I know within your organization, you're looking at that. I had the opportunity, Chris, come on down here. Chris Rich, who I introduced earlier, but I asked him if he would make some comments around the viability of predictable fees from his standpoint. Now, I think he's going to tell you that his comments are representative of him and his county and that he can't speak for the state association as a whole, but I thought it would be good for us to just have a little dialogue and let you get some comments on the local level. So Chris, why don't you come on up and join me?
You guys want to switch?
Thank you. Oh, that's right. Well, this is for the recording, so we have to use both.
Okay. Well, indeed, Ada County, and I can only speak for Ada, we're a little different. I was talking to Jesse in the back of the room. We rely on about, I think I've got budgeted $2.2 million of revenue from recording fees. That's based on about 120,000 documents coming across our operation, and that's an entirely different model than you're going to encounter in Camas County or Lemhi County. And so in our environment, actually recording is about the only one that we can more or less run like a business because we don't have too much regulation. So we are able, with those fees, to upgrade our software. We now have the Lewallen platform, and we've been able to not only use that, bring in some optical character recognition, but we've also been able to use those fees to digitize all our microfilms. So it's not all in Lewallen or indexed, but we've got the Lewallen system, we've got everything else pretty much laid out in another digital format. So we work at a different pace, and we view the title industry as really our customers. And so hopefully you're getting very good service from Jim Morton, our recording supervisor, and yeah, as mentioned, Jim's part of PRIA. When it gets down to the documents, I certainly understand the forces you're dealing with government regulation. Oddly enough, the most vexing thing in my life is having to deal. I have the Department of Justice going through all our elections processes right now. They're going to be out on the 8th of March, seeing that we comply with a variety of laws. I've got the Supreme Court who directs me on everything in the courts. I've got the Secretary of State and all also involved in elections. So I have a great understanding and empathy for when you have to deal with a fee structure that doesn't meet contemporary business needs. And from our perspective, as long as the fees are revenue neutral, we're fine. I actually, when I say we, I'm completely comfortable and would support going to documents on a document cost basis. Jim has talked to Helion to see if our software provider could accommodate that, and yes. So as a practical matter, we have no problem switching over from a per page to a document-based revenue source. So, boy, with that, I don't know if there's
well, you
else.
answered that question. So from a potential statewide issue or perspective, what concerns might some of the smaller counties have?
Well, we have 8 people working full-time in our recording department. You get into a very small county where the recorder, the elected clerk, auditor, recorder, may be going in and recording documents. If they get revenue, and you probably know better than I, but say you get a county that has $30,000 revenue from recording fees, they may not have the ability to have a digitized system or be able to maintain it because the clerk is also handling IT and a variety of other things. So for them, dollars are a big item. Certainly it's important to us. But for them, when we get into issues that we've talked about in the past of multi-title docs coming in, I think there's an example where in Ada County we will accept multi-title docs because to me it's part of your new business model and the dollars are insignificant. You get into a small county, they look at it and they say, well, there might be $500 there. And that is a big issue to them. So I think when they're looking at a proposal from industry with regards to going on a per document basis, they'll be looking at historically, I assume, the fluctuation, because the mix of deeds, mortgages, documents, liens is not constant, and it varies. So they'll want to be covered from when times are really good to when they get really bad. And then I think also with recorders, we're always apprehensive about the future, and we don't know if the number of pages or the mix in the documents will change. And certainly you can go ahead and change the statutes as time is needed, but a lot of it's going to be change management, I think, with dealing with clerks. But with this, if maybe you can address multi-title docs along with a change in fees.
Okay, good point. One other comment that I would make as potentially you consider an environment that has a fixed component to it. One of the things that recorders are also concerned about is it's not just the initial processing of a document or the intake of that document, but the perpetual long-term storage of that document. And that is something that has to be considered for a number of years out, and that initial cost is what drives that ongoing storage or access to the data too. So sometimes on the business side we hear, well, it shouldn't cost them that much money to process this document, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that it's a one-time fee for a long-term service that you provide. Would you want to comment on that?
Well, yeah, long-term, whether it's the court record or land records, we have to maintain them forever. The challenge right now is, for instance, in Ada County, we're looking at moving a lot of our data up into the cloud, and that's going to be a major transition. And so we're also, from a countywide perspective, migrating away from in-house software to third-party software. And so our whole IT makeup of personnel is changing from, if you will, developers to more managers of systems. So, and none of it's cheaper. And so there are hidden costs that you won't see, necessarily recording fees going to.
Okay. Let me transition to another comment that we've talked about the potential of doing this, but the question that usually comes up is, okay, that sounds good for multiple parties, but has anybody done this, and what's been the experience? And so there's a couple of states that have actually been doing this for a number of years, and that is Wisconsin and Minnesota. And what they have found from both perspectives, from the lender and settlement perspective, they tend to see almost no issues with recording fees in those states. I was a part of a session last week, actually, at the PREA annual conference, and we had a representative from the lending side of the house, and they made the comment that in the past, I think 7 years, they could think of less than a handful of recording fee issues out of the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin. Now, contrast that with that same national lender who said they have over 100 people sitting in a building comparing closing disclosures to actual recorded documents and are seeing a significant number of variances in other states across the country. What you may not realize is, from the lender standpoint, I mean, this has obviously been an issue. It's not a new issue with TRID. What's new about it is the liability and the timelines that are causing more attention to be focused on it. But this particular lender has had, as I said, over 100 people physically looking at disclosures and looking at the recording document and seeing if the amount on the recorded document matches the disclosure. And that's an insane cost, number one. But number two, the fact that the business process or practice is having to drive that, I think, is an indication that as an industry, we're not doing things in the most efficient way. So how does that potentially affect the recorder in a predictable fee environment? Well, the things we heard from the recorder in those, or the recorders in those two states, were, I don't have to count pages anymore, so I don't have staff time doing that. It has reduced the number of rejections because I didn't have to send a document back because the wrong fees were submitted with it. It has improved my customer service because I don't get as many phone calls and I don't have as many people coming into the office asking questions. And in those two states' cases, they felt like overall they were getting more money under this fee model than they did under the page model, and they were actually having less manual effort involved. So that's an example of it in two states where I think a predictable fee really was a win-win scenario. So we said, okay, that sounds good. That's the kind of things we want to hear. So then we went back and asked a few more questions and said, well, how did you get to that point? What was it that said, yeah, this is a good thing to do, and why did everybody get on board? Because anytime you make change, you tend to have certain factions who want one thing or something else or want to keep it the same way. And what we heard was really encouraging. They said that it was a collaborative effort between the lending side of the house, the settlement side of the house, and the government side of the house. And there were all things that were of interest and of benefit to each of those parties. And they were able to craft some legislation that said, you know, this works for me. And in the end, they came out with a pretty good scenario. So what we have then tried to do is say, okay, let's change the thought process on the government side from, well, we can't do that here, to how did it get done in some states? What were the positive things? What were some of the steps? And there have been several of us on the PREA board that have been doing presentations like this, or in more depth from the recorder standpoint around the states this year. And we've had several more states start the process of trying to either have meetings or actually drafting legislation that could move towards a predictable fee. Now, there are several other states that are also using predictable fees. Arizona has a version of that. Washington, D.C. has that. Massachusetts has that. And I actually, John's got a copy of this document that has a reference to some of the legislation that's been passed in some of these states, if that's of interest to you, or we can provide that if we need to again. But our message is there's potential benefits for everyone involved. It's not a brand new concept. It's a relatively new concept, but you're not breaking new ground. There are a number of states that have encountered this kind of process before, and I was pleased to meet Chris and to hear his views as to, you know, how his office would react to something like this. And I think when you have a recorder who is progressive and interested in looking at the big picture and is willing to have communication, I encourage you as the land title side of the house to take advantage of that and make sure that you open the doors and handle it from a communication standpoint. Do you want to say something else there?
Just as a comment on that, I think we can gain some marginal improvements by going from a per page to a document basis. But right now, 63% of our total documents are coming in electronically. And so, in a sense, we'll verify the page count, but hopefully Lewallen and everybody else who you'll be going through, Simplifile or whatever, that streamlines everything. So we are very comfortable with trying to change how we do our business in terms of we want to push more e-recording, like to get those, Jim and I have talked about trying to get those numbers up in the 80 percentile. We're talking to Jerry about how we're going into the government-to-government area to try and get all of the stuff we get in from the cities and the state to come in electronically, because like you folks, I'm very concerned about the money that comes in and the expenses. So we're going to try and move to more of a back office operation and less front office, and change how we do business. And this could be a component of that.
Okay. I would like to make an offer or have an opportunity, if those of you in the room would like to ask questions at this point of anything that we've talked about or any of the specific local county stuff that Chris might be able to answer. Yes, sir.
If that kind of legislation came through, we went to a document-based, what would your transition time be? What kind of lead time will you need to make that switch?
Let me repeat the question for the camera. The question was, if potential legislation were to be approved or enacted, what kind of time frame do you think you would need to be able to implement that?
Okay. Well, bear in mind, Ada County is different than the other counties. Legislation takes effect July 1st in the state of Idaho. I would think we would just need a couple months lead time because my understanding that Jim's communication with Lewallen is, I think that a lot of the features are already built into the software. So for us, it's just a matter of our vendor changing the settings. So I would think that we could do it in a couple months. Probably the biggest challenge would just be letting industry and everyone know that we've switched our practices. But for us, negligible amount of time.
And let me just make a comment too. Chris has referred to Lewallen a couple of times. That is the vendor that his county has chosen to use for recording software. Other counties may be using a different vendor or could be using the same one, but just like you use different software from a title closing standpoint, counties have a variety of options as to what software they're using for their recording software, and Lewallen happens to be the vendor that Ada County is using, and they're one of the predominant ones in the area.
In Canyon County. So between Ada and Canyon, you've got 45% of the state covered with one vendor.
Okay, I didn't want you to be thrown by that name if you weren't familiar with it. Yes, sir.
Chris, I believe that the counties met early in February, reporters, and you guys had an opportunity to review some proposed language to a bill for the flat fee reporting fee at that point in time. Can you speak to the general level of receptivity from the clerks at that point in time, and maybe speak to what we might be able to do to move that acceptability or move that level of acceptance?
You want to repeat the question?
Yeah. I guess the question is, at the Midwinter Conference of the Association of Counties, how receptive were the clerks to the proposed legislation coming in for flat or standardized fees? I think some of them, there's just a lot of apprehension. Depending on your clerks, you have recorders that have very good relations with their title companies and partners. You have some that are a little more tenuous, and you have some folks who are just really focused on money. And I would say predominantly the question that folks had is what's afoot here? And so I think if I was sitting in your shoes, I think really an education effort to, one, explain the situation that you're under and show everyone that it's a revenue-neutral endeavor. The other concern is what will it be in the future, and are they going to have to be going to the legislature to constantly tweak things? But I would think that really it's just building relationships and working with the recorders, and working with 44 recorders is challenging.
You had also mentioned the multi-title issue
yeah.
previously. You want to add that to your...
Well, I think that's to me, it's a good one to bring into, because there is a division among recorders, and it might be 1 or 2 in 44 or 42 counties, where the multi-title docs, which I think if you work in multiple counties, you deal in Ada County, we will accept a substitution and a refi combo or so. You go to a neighboring county, they'll say no. And so I just find it odd. There's a statutory construct that the clerks will look at. So I think, one, the statute needs to be cleaned up there. But for them, it's just a matter of money. So if it can be demonstrated that these combo docs could be covered in there, and they get covered with it, you might be able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Other questions? Either we put everybody to sleep, or we did a really good job. Or they're all so excited that now they have to go check out of their rooms that they're... No. Other questions? Okay. We're actually a few minutes ahead of schedule. Hopefully nobody will be upset over that. But let me just say thank you for the opportunity to come and be a part of this and to share more of the government side of the equation, and to let you know that we as PREA are trying to encourage an inclusiveness around what is this real estate industry that the recorders are a vital part of, even though they may not be a visible part of it. So, thank you.